Hello, and welcome to World of Warbirds. I'm Brian Pierce. Hello, Warbirders. If you enjoy this video, please do your part and become a member of the channel, or drop me a super thanks. If you can't do either of those, then please just like and subscribe and hit the bell. It's really appreciated. Gerhard Fieseler was born in April 1896 near Cologne. During the First World War, he joined the Air Service, and although he was hampered by both injuries due to a crash and grounding due to illness, he still managed to rack up 19 confirmed kills with 3 probables, and he was awarded the Golden Military Merit Cross and the Iron Cross first and second classes. After the war ended, he ran a print shop, but still suffered from a chronic case of the aviation bug, and in 1926 became a flight instructor. He even developed his own maneuver that if you've been to any air show you've surely seen, which is called a Fieseler after him, but it's also called a hammerhead or STOL turn. On top of coming up with his own signature move, he designed his own stunt plane that was called the Fieseler F1 Tigerschwalbe. The Swedish Air Force liked the look of it so much that they ordered 25 of them. In 1930, Fieseler used his savings to purchase the Segelflugzeugbau Kassel sailplane factory, renaming it Fieseler Flugzeugbau. Fieseler and his company were in the right place at the right time for the rebuilding of the Luftwaffe, and in 1935 the company started winning military contracts. The Storch was conceived by Fieseler himself, and his technical team set to work on this private project with possible applications in both the military and civilian flying worlds. They designed a high-winged monoplane with seats for 3, a pilot, and 2 tandem passenger seats behind. The fuselage was constructed of fabric-covered welded steel tubes. The wings were a fabric-covered wood structure with aluminum slots along the entirety of the leading edge. The trailing edge featured wooden flaps. The outer portions of these were ailerons. Power was to be provided by an Argus AS-10 engine turning a 2-bladed propeller. This engine, which was used on many Luftwaffe training aircraft, was an air-cooled inverted V8 that could produce up to 270 horsepower. Supposedly, this engine was quite reliable in unfavorable conditions such as cold and dust. This reliability, as we know, was to come in very useful everywhere from the desert to Russia. Another interesting feature that was built into the Storch was that the wings could be folded back along the sides of the fuselage. As someone who has tried to shoehorn a dozen training aircraft into a hangar, this would be a very welcome feature indeed. The aircraft could even be easily road transported either on a flatbed trailer or as a trailer by simply hitching to the tail and towing slowly on the main gear. Unlike many aircraft, the undercarriage was one of the main distinguishing features of this aircraft, and was the inspiration for the nickname of Storch. The spindly legs hang down just like those of the long-legged bird, you know, the one that brings babies. Everyone knows that storks are where babies come from. Those legs looked deceptively spindly, but were built very strong. They were attached to the wing roots and were braced to the lower fuselage with multiple struts, providing great strength in multiple angles. The long spindly look of the gear was due to the insane amount of shock-absorbing travel that was built into the gear. On touchdown, there was first 20 centimeters or 8 inches of settling before the oleo and spring absorbers began absorbing the shock. Then there was another 40 centimeters or 16 inches of travel as the oil and springs handled the landing energy. In comparison, my Cessna 172's front oleo has only a couple inches of play, hence the way we treat it as if it were made of glass. Not the Storch. It was designed to handle being slammed hard onto rough surfaces with high descent rates and angles. With the design settled, it was time to start building them. Liking what you're seeing? Why not click super thanks? I'd really appreciate it. In 1936, 5 prototypes of what was now known as the Fi 156 were built. They performed so well that more prototypes were ordered right away. In order to give the rest of the German aviation industry a chance at the contract, a specification was drawn up for everyone else to try to build a comparable machine. But as the specification was based on what the Storch could do, it was going to be pretty hard for anyone else to beat it. Messerschmitt tried with their Bf 163. The Bf 163 was Messerschmitt's answer to the Storch. It was powered by the same Argus AS-10 engine and, no offense, kind of looked like Messerschmitt had copied off of Fieseler's homework. To continue the schoolwork metaphor, the assignment was also handed in late, in 1938. They built one prototype, and its performance was similar, but not better, than the Fi 156. It was also more complicated and more expensive to produce, so only one prototype was ever put together and flown. And the number 163 was recycled later for the Messerschmitt Me 163 Comet. Go check out my video on that one. Another competitor, the Siebel Si-201, was a truly weird-looking aircraft. In my mind, it looks like a flying toll booth. The first prototype Si-201 flew in summer of 1938. Supposedly its performance was good in the air, with a very good STOL, or short takeoff or landing, characteristic. But it did have problems. At higher speeds, the skinny tail boom developed an annoying flutter under certain flight characteristics. The second prototype somewhat had a beefed up tail boom, but didn't really solve the flutter problem. And the Si-201 also had very picky center of gravity limits, making it operationally troublesome, and further development was ceased. But wait a minute. Focke-Wulf decided to take a kick at the can, and we know that they built great airplanes. So the FW-186 must have given the Storch a run for its money. Even more, the FW-186 was an autogyro. The autogyro is a precursor to the helicopter. It kinda looks like a helicopter, with a big rotor blade on top, but the rotor is either unpowered or mostly unpowered. Like in a helicopter, the function of the rotor is to spin in the air and to provide lift. But unlike a helicopter, another propeller driven by an engine is required for thrust. The rotor acts more like a spinning glider wing. The theory is that this aircraft should have good short takeoff or landing characteristics, especially in landing. If you've ever seen a helicopter practice engine failure auto-rotation landings, you can see what an autogyro could do. It could come in quite steep for a landing. The problem would be on takeoff. To make the new aircraft, Focke-Wulf took one of their highly successful FW-56 Stossers, which was a single-engine, parasol-winged advanced trainer, and ripped off the wing and installed the rotor. A clutch system was needed to spin up the rotor before takeoff. Imagine if you had to high-speed taxi around enough to get the rotor spinning on its own. The FW-186 did fly and could take off and land in very short distances, but it could not hover nor take off and land vertically. There were 2 seats in tandem. The advantages of the 186 were just outweighed by the complications of the unorthodox design, and they only built one. So who was left standing at the end of the competition? The Storch. Almost 3,000 Storchs were built, most by Fieseler, although production was shifted elsewhere as Fieseler was also a subcontractor for the FW-190 program, and eventually demand for those parts outweighed the production of the Storch, which was also then produced in France, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. Surprisingly, the Soviet Union also built a version of the Storch. Following the signing of the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, Several aircraft, including Fi-156s, were supplied to the USSR. Oleg Antonov was put in charge of making the technology work for the Soviets, and he pretty much copied the design wholesale, putting in a different engine, and they called it the Oka-38. There were two versions, one for liaison work, and the other was configured as an air ambulance that could carry 2 stretchers and a medic. I have not been able to figure out how many they built. But this wouldn't be the first time for Germany's enemies to gaze admiringly at the Storch. Commandeered Fi-156s ended up being used by many Allied commanders during the war. The Storch really did serve from before the conflict until the very last day and went everywhere the German forces went. As such, there were versions with modifications to suit just about every role you could think of, and some I bet you wouldn't think of. Some had a gun installed in the rear for defense. Some versions had filtered intakes and larger oil coolers for tropical and desert conditions. Some had hardpoints to carry camera pods or extra fuel tanks. There was an air ambulance version with an extra large rear fuselage door to admit 2 stretchers. Instead of the little landing gear wheels, some were equipped with tracked gear. Yes, tracks, like a tank. The only other aircraft I've ever seen with this was the B-36 bomber. Some had devices installed to lay down a smoke screen, and there was an anti-sub version that could carry a depth charge. There was a civilian version with 5 seats. There was even a version that could lay down telephone wire. Yes, it would fly along and reel out telephone wire. When I said that Storchs were coveted by their enemies, I wasn't kidding. Yes, the Russians built and used their exact copies of the Fi-156, while British leadership seemed to have a fetish for the type. Several air vice marshals of the RAF used captured Storchs as their personal aircraft, and none other than Field Marshal Montgomery chose to use a Storch as his personal transport. A Storch was the last aircraft shot down by the Allies on the Western Front. Although that didn't really seem to halt their use. The French and others continued to use captured Storchs after the war for many roles, including search and rescue and agricultural spraying. There are too many Storchs to mention all over the world, and many are in airworthy state. Perhaps even more impressive is that the original design has spawned many replicas and modern scale versions that are a testament to the genius of the original design. The rescue of Benito Mussolini reads like a script to a movie. Of course, movies have been made about the event, but I'm talking about a fictional movie, and in fact one that if you didn't know it happened would have seemed too far-fetched to be real. Let's set the stage. In July 1943, Mussolini had been arrested on orders from the Italian king, and for the next month was held in various locations before finally moved to a super secure location where it would seemingly be impossible for him to be rescued. The isolated location was 6,000 feet up, high in the Gran Sasso d'Italia mountain range. There is only one way in or out of this building, and that is via a cable car that was secured at the bottom by armed guards. There is no other way to approach this place without being spotted. No cover to hide, and during the climb, you would be picked off like targets in a shooting range. Lastly, if you did somehow climb up there, before you could reach Mussolini, you would have to get through the force of 200 well-equipped carabinieri guards who were securing him. Then, how would you get him out? This was the situation confronting paratroop General Kurt Student when he was ordered by Adolf Hitler to plan a rescue. Dropping in by parachute was deemed too dangerous as mountain winds could easily scatter the troops, and a concentration of force would definitely be needed to overwhelm the 200 guards. So a glider attack was decided upon using the Luftwaffe's truly excellent little assault glider, the DFS-230. Another team of Fallschirmjägers, led by Major Harold Morse, who was the commander of the mission, would arrive by land and capture the cable car station. So, then, how to get Mussolini out? The plan was to use the Fokker Archgelis FA-223 helicopter. Now, for us today, a helicopter is a normal piece of transportation. But in 1943, this was cutting-edge James Bond-type stuff, and completely suitable for this daring, audacious raid. On the day of the mission, 12 DFS-230s carrying the Fallschirmjägers and 16 accompanying SS troopers were hauled into the air by Henschel 126s from the Pratica di Mare near Rome. The gliders roughly but successfully landed on the plateau, and the troops stormed the hotel and freed Mussolini. The element of surprise must have helped, but the SS team also had Italian General Fernando Soletti along as a hostage, who ordered the troops not to shoot. Now that the hard part had been done, the easy part was getting Mussolini out, right? Wrong. Plan A was to use the newfangled cutting-edge technology FA-223 helicopter to whisk Mussolini down the mountain. But unfortunately, it was maybe a little too cutting-edge, and the FA-223 that was tasked with picking up the Duce broke down before it could be used. Plan B was to use our hero warbird, the Fi-156 Storch, to land on the plateau itself. This Storch was flown by none other than General Student's personal pilot, Captain Heinrich Gerlach, and he brought the Storch in and supposedly landed in 100 feet, showing off the aircraft's superlative short landing capabilities. While the paratroops were clearing stones away from the makeshift takeoff zone, Gerlach had a situation to deal with that was perhaps more tricky than the short landing he had just performed. As Mussolini was being loaded in the plane, the leader of the accompanying SS group, Otto Skorzeny, suddenly insisted that he had to go too. Now yes, the Storch could carry 2 passengers, but up on the plateau the conditions were less than ideal. The takeoff area was only 250 feet long and ended at a cliff. They were 6,000 feet up, which meant that the density altitude for the aircraft to work with was at least that, and depending on what the temperature was, it could have been even higher. Meaning that the Storch would behave with the reduced performance of high altitude. The wings would generate less lift, and there would be less thrust from the engine. Lastly, Skorzeny was a big guy at 6'4", and the poor Storch would have to haul his weight into the air too. So Gerlach was presented with this impossible situation. His pilot sense would have told him to just take Mussolini and leave Skorzeny behind. That was the mission, and just taking the Duce would make the mission more likely to succeed. On the other hand, Skorzeny had played the Hitler card, stating that he must accompany Mussolini under the Führer's personal orders. So Gerlach prepared for what must have been the shortest short-field takeoff of his life. He ran the little engine up to its absolute full power, with paratroopers holding on to the aircraft during the run-up, and then ordered them to let go. The paratroopers watched as the far too slow for flight Storch went off the edge of the cliff, expecting a crash. But then no, there is the little Storch, just clearing the rocks, but definitely airborne and heading for Pratica di Mare airfield, where Mussolini and Skorzeny would then board a more suitable aircraft, a Heinkel HE-111, for the flight to Vienna. The second Storch pilot story that I'm going to tell is about Hanna Reitsch. She was an award-winning glider and test pilot on the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka and the Dornier Do-17. She test flew the Me-163, making her the first woman to pilot a rocket plane. She test flew the Fokker Angelis FA-61, making her the first woman to fly a helicopter. Later on, she would be appointed member number 1 of the Whirly Girls Female Helicopter Pilot Association. She test flew the manned, or in this case, womaned version of the V-1 flying bomb, which was called the Fieseler F1-103R Reichenberg, making her the first woman to fly a jet. I've got a video on that one too. She is only one of 3 women to earn the Iron Cross First Class Luftwaffe. Do I sound a little smitten? Well, yes I am. Alright, enough mooning over her, and let's shift our minds back to the waning days of the war. Hitler was in his bunker, and after a major succession disagreement with Hermann Göring, he decided to sack him and give command of the Luftwaffe, or whatever of it was left, to Generaloberst Robert Ritter von Greim. Now, although she never married, Reich and von Greim seemed mighty close. They had spent 3 weeks in the Eastern Front, visiting Luftwaffe units, flying, guess what? A Fieseler F1-156 Storch. When von Greim got the summons to the bunker, he and Hanna Reitsch took off from Gatow Airfield, which is located in a suburb southwest of Berlin. Von Greim was flying until they were hit by Soviet AA fire and he was wounded. Reitsch somehow managed to be able to reach the stick and throttle, took over, and landed the plane on an improvised airstrip in the Tiergarten near the Brandenburg Gate. You can actually see a representation of their arrival in the bunker in the film Downfall, where Hitler proclaimed von Greim to command the Luftwaffe. The couple then flew out, but not in a Storch. Instead, they used an Arado AR-96. Perhaps the Storch had been too badly damaged by the Soviet AA fire and the landing to be airworthy again. A photo does exist of a ruined Storch that is reputed to be the very one that made that last daring flight, although we can't be sure. If it isn't, it can certainly represent it. Von Greim didn't command the Luftwaffe very long. When he was captured, he supposedly said, "I am the head of the Luftwaffe, but I have no Luftwaffe." Several weeks after that, he committed suicide in prison. As for Hanna Reitsch, well, she survived the war and lived to the age of 67. There are many surviving Storchs and several airworthy ones. One that is presently under restoration is an example at the National Museum of the United States Air Force. It is being painted up as the machine that was used by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel in North Africa. This example, which was built in 1940, was exported to Sweden, where it remained until 1948. Interestingly enough, the last German to fly it before its acquisition by the donors in 1973 was German World War II ace Erich Hartmann. It was delivered to the museum in 1974. If you enjoyed this video, please do your part and become a member of the channel or drop me a super thanks. If you can't do either of those, then please just like and subscribe. It's really appreciated. Until next time.